can be complicated. Politicians sometimes create circumstances that hurt businesses and consumers, and then they hide behind a wall of to avoid taking responsibility for their bad economic policies. On Red Tape Africa, we slice through the jargon, drawing a direct link between government actions and their effects on businesses across the continent. Red Tape Africa is where we break down the jargons of business and economic policies in plain English so that you can understand how the impacts on your business and on you. Join us every Tuesday and Thursday on Africa Business Radio as we deliver an impartial verdict on these policies. Red Tape Africa, economic policy impact in plain English. Cut through the ball with Red Tape Africa. Follow us on all social media at Red Tape Africa and tweet at us using the hashtag Red Tape Africa. Red Tape Africa, economic policy impact in plain English.
Gerald Ford once said, "A government big enough to give you everything you want is a government big enough to take from you everything you have." My name is David Hundeyin, and you are listening to Red Tape Africa on Africa Business Radio, where we break down economic policies in plain English and link them directly to you. No long story. On Red Tape Africa today, we are discussing the recent spate of business closures in Kenya. Now, of course, you know that this is a Pan-African show, so we don't just focus on what is happening in Nigeria or West Africa. We like to get a bird's eye view of what is happening across the continent. And this week, we're talking about what is going on in Kenya. So recently, SportPesa, which is the biggest betting firm in Kenya, announced that it is leaving the country on account of what it termed as government interference and a poor business environment. Soon after, the Kenyan government introduced a new series of taxes on betting businesses in the country. This comes at a time when Kenya is going through a bit of an economic crisis of its own. On Kenyan social media, there's a popular hashtag now called #SaveOurJobs, as there seems to be a popular perception that the Kenyan government is making the operating environment for businesses more difficult now than it has ever been. In the past few months, there have been closures of a bus-hailing app, a popular bus-hailing app in Kenya. They call them Matatu. And there has also been the closure of LPG delivery firms, which has made illegal trading of gas explode in Kenya. So these are the things that have made people get the idea that the Kenyan government is making business a lot more difficult than it needs to be. And the Kenyan government is becoming bigger than it needs to be, which is also a popular bone of contention in African business circles. So the question is, do we need a bigger government or do we need a bigger economy? Is our problem a productivity problem, or is our problem a regulation problem? That's what we're going to discuss on the show today. On the show with me today, I have Eke Orum, founder of Cash Estates, a Pan-African fintech investment startup. Hi, Eke.
Hi, David. How's it going?
I'm good.
Great to meet you and great to be on the show.
All right. We will be right back.
Log on to www.africabusinessradio.com. Your favorite shows are available as podcasts. Download them on our website and mobile app. Africa Business Radio, towards a profitable Africa.
Cut through the ball with Red Tape Africa. Follow us on all social media at Red Tape Africa and tweet at us using the hashtag Red Tape Africa. Red Tape Africa, economic policy impact in plain English.
On the show with me today, I have Eke Orum, founder of Cash Estates, a Pan-African fintech investment startup. I have to apologize because before we went on the break, we had a technical issue, so Ake's mic actually wasn't on. Hi, Eke.
Hi, David. Nice to meet you, David. Nice to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you here. Briefly, before I get into the show, it would be nice if you just give me a quick rundown of what you do at Cash Estate.
Awesome, sure. Essentially, what we're doing at Cash Estate is allow retail individuals and businesses really to have their investments in dollars. So we're opening up the universe of dollar-denominated asset classes to everybody because we believe that long-term, it's a currency that holds its value better, and you want to appreciate in a currency like that versus only doing local currency investments. So that's essentially what we do.
Great. Later on in the show, we will also get to listen to a news report from Ground Zero in Nairobi, Kenya, to give us a better sense of what is happening over there. Now, we don't just want to stay in here in an echo chamber and talk to ourselves. So we want to hear from you wherever in the world you're listening to the show from. So tweet at us with the hashtag RedTapeAfrica. That is hashtag RedTapeAfrica. And we will do our best to read out your tweets and engage with them. Also, don't forget to like and follow our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram handles at RedTapeAfrica and at Africa Business Radio. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Now, before I get into the on-ground reality of whether, there is actually a policy bias against businesses, whether businesses are actually closing down because of government involvement or whatnot. Okay, I want to quickly get your take on something which has bothered me for a while. Now, from my point of view, it seems as if African governments seem to have a need to impose regulations and taxes and restrictions on businesses that perhaps are not commensurate with our current economic reality here. Now, that's my opinion, right? So, and this is what I've observed in Nigeria, this is what I've observed in Kenya, this is what I've observed in Tanzania, even in South Africa as well. So, I want to get your take on this. How do you see the status of government involvement in business in Africa? Is this heading in the right direction? Is government involvement helping us have better economies, or is it retarding growth of our economy?
All right, this is something that I've thought about a lot as well, and in my case, I believe that it's a bit of a mixed bag, but the bag definitely tilts more towards the negative side of it. And the reason I say that is there's nobody that's going to advocate for complete lack of regulations, right? We want some kind of regulations, but we want these regulations to make sense in the context of where businesses are today. Also, we want these regulations to be somewhat stable. So what we see in Africa is that regulations are very ad hoc, where one set of government officials are telling you something completely different from what the other set are telling you. Or when it comes to taxation, there's no clear, straightforward tax regime that, okay, if I start out as a business, these are the tax obligations. Instead, what you see is today, one government official imposes some tax, tomorrow another one comes up with a different tax, and you get the sense that they are not thinking through the larger picture of what the space a business has to operate in. Everybody's only thing on the political side, on the government side, they're mostly always thinking about how much money can we get from every business that we find. And that's not an environment that is conducive for any business to growing, because for me, I think it's short-termism on the part of governments. They're thinking, okay, we get this money, and once this business collapses, there's someone else coming down that we can tax.
Soldier
right?
Go, soldier come.
Exactly. But if they actually take their time and create a straightforward, understandable regulatory framework and tax framework that is easy and predictable, then businesses know, okay, this is what we have to give to the government, and then that once we do that, we're done. And you see a lot more businesses investing, you see a lot more growth, and in the long term, the government, because what we need across Africa, really, we need economic growth more than everything. And once the economy is growing, the government, even with the smaller amount of taxes they are collecting, you're collecting it from more businesses, you're collecting it from more revenue and more profits, and therefore the government itself would also have more revenue going to its coffers. So you see that with all the taxation that we have, that has not necessarily increased government revenue. So that's I think is the problem. They need to think more long term and less short term.
It's funny you say this, because I remember about 4 months ago, during the kerfuffle that MTN Nigeria had here, when, almost every other week they were getting raided, they were getting dragged in the media, and there was this problem or that problem. And I remember I spoke to a policy official around that time, off the record, so I obviously can't mention his name, and he said, well, even if MTN, that first of all, MTN can't leave. that the Nigerian market is too important for them, and even if they were to leave, that people will be struggling to come in and replace them. So so we seem to have this perception, at least in Nigeria, that we have the market, so the investors have to kowtow to us. We are just too important, which I personally disagree with, but that seems to be the case. And on the show last week, I remember we were speaking to Eugene Uzo, and he made the point that the head of customs, the head of Nigerian customs, made a comment that the revenue that they're generating now is exponentially more than it has ever been. And he said, so what he doesn't understand is, are you working for Nigerians or are you a parasite?
Right.
Like, is your job
to make more money?
Yeah. Is your job to improve the country, or is your job just to make more money?
Right.
Are you living parasitically off us? Do you, being in the business that you are in, do you have such an experience, or has that not touched you so far?
Fortunately, I've not really had that experience, but I think that's also because as a business we are managing our exposure to Nigeria and really to different countries that we plan to operate in. We're a US company, and even though we have exposure to the local markets, we have that in such a way that to the best of our ability, we're trying to limit how much exposure. But the thing you mentioned with MTN is really important because, for one, you can't build a productive economy on just MTN. So when people come in and they want to invest in your country, which is really the only place growth for any economy is going to come from is FDI. People investing into starting companies, into financing companies or infrastructure in your country. And when they look at the way you handle MTN, almost like, it's a money box for you to raid whenever you need funds. And they're like, if a whole MTN is getting that kind of a shakedown, what will happen to us that we're just starting from the bottom, right? So if the guys at the top are being shaken down, that means there's no hope for us at the bottom. And therefore, everybody, there's a friend of mine who is he's trying to build like a private university, and we're talking to some US investors who were discussing trying to invest almost $3 million. That's where the conversation was. And some of these things happen, and a lot of them are just spooked. And they're like, listen, we'd rather stay in the markets we understand what the risks are than to come into your space and deal with this kind of unpredictable. So the governments have to consider that. What kind of signal are you sending to people who want to start businesses? You have huge populations that need these jobs, and businesses that want to come in don't want to, because you're creating the impression that we're there to be taken down, right? So customs is making money, FIRS is making money. We're all like a money center for the government. That's not encouraging at all. Yeah.
So what I take away from that is the government has to ask, the governments rather, not the government, because we're talking from a Pan-African perspective. The governments have to ask themselves that, are they working for us, or are they just taking from us? And it's funny you said that, because this goes right into the body of what we're going to discuss today. So I'm reading an article now from QZ.com about what is happening in Kenya. And it says on September 30, transport officials in Nairobi announced the closure of 2 bus hailing apps. Like, they've stopped them from operating. The apps are called Little and Swivel. Now, Little is backed by Safaricom, which is obviously East Africa's biggest telecoms firm, and Swivel is headquartered in Cairo in Egypt. So, to all intents and purposes, both of these firms are foreign-backed. Like, they are literally FDI. They're the face of FDI in Kenya. And the reason given for their closure was that they were apparently operating under a tour's license as against a commuter service license. So the government basically says you are using the wrong license to operate here. So if you want to operate in the public transportation industry, in the urban public transportation industry, you have to have a commuter license. And you are using a tour license, which is like a tourism kind of thing. So it's not the same kind of license. So we're just going to close you down. Now, from a strictly legal point of view, the government obviously is well within their rights, because obviously there are the rules. And apparently the startups, according to what the government said, they have flouted the rules, right? Now, my question is, as a government looking at this situation, bear in mind that Kenya is a country that has